In the 20th century, a lot of critical ink was spilled trying to find out who were the authors of the sagas. Like in so many other cases, Njál's saga has a certain distinction from the others. The common belief was that by finding the author of Njál's saga, you would find the greatest writer who ever lived in Iceland. Several academics had this search as a main theme of their scholarly work. I'm going to introduce you to one of them, even if his writings are now mostly considered out of date. It's a contribution that demonstrates a concern which is hardly part of what is now seen as serious scholarly research. His name was Barði Guðmundsson, born in the year 1900, a respectable man in his time, teacher of history, member of parliament, and state archivist for over 2 decades. Guðmundsson wrote a series of articles published between the 1930s and the 1950s, where the point of departure is that a particular historical individual was the author of Njál's saga. With this supposed author in mind, Guðmundsson measured every detail of the saga, not least by estimating how thoroughly the saga describes landscape and local conditions. His idea was that since some regions are described in the saga with greater knowledge than others, one can assume that the author was well acquainted with these places, most likely because he had lived there himself. By finding that 13th century individual whose residential history best matches the landscape descriptions of Njál's saga, Guðmundsson proclaimed to have discovered the saga's author. His candidate was Þorvarður Þórarinsson, a chieftain who first appears in written records in the year 1248 and died in 1296. He was a key player in the evolution of Iceland's social order in the mid to late 13th century. It's a process that is best described as a concentration of power, when the old chieftaincies, which had been spread evenly across the country, began to merge into larger entities, dominions or areas of regional control. Instead of the 39 chieftains came only a handful of overlords who presided much larger territories than the former statesmen. In fact, only 5 families held the reins. In the west, there were the Sturlungar, descendants of Snorri Goði, and it seems highly likely that it was they who commissioned Eyrbyggja saga. In the north, there were the Ásbyrningar. In the south, there were the Oddaverjar and the Haukdælir, the patrons of Ari the Wise. In the east, the ruling family were the Svinfellingar. Þorvarður Þórarinsson, our supposed author of Njál's saga, belonged to the Svinfellingar clan. The family's name is derived from Svinafell, a farm in the east quarter that figures prominently in the later half of the saga, as the home of Flosi Þórðarson, who gets the unenviable role as leader of the burners who killed Njál and his family. Now let's assume that Guðmundsson's hypothesis was true. Let's imagine we knew for sure that Þorvarður Þórarinsson was the author of Njál's saga. It would certainly give this place a special significance for the saga and its origin. This is the traditional seat of the Svinfellingar family, a symbolic power base of the ruling clan in East Iceland during medieval times. Svinafell is the very manor from which the name of the family is derived. At the start of the 11th century, when the events of Njál's saga supposedly took place, the Svinfellingar were the holders of a chieftaincy in the southeast. But 200 years later, when Þorvarður Þórarinsson was a kid, a great concentration of power had taken place, mainly by the unification of chieftaincies in the hands of only a few powerful families. The Svinfellingar were one of them, holding all the chieftaincies in the east quarter. The struggle between the 5 leading families went on for decades, resulting in an era of momentous conflicts around the country between 1220 and 1260. Gradually, the families sapped each other's strengths until none of them was powerful enough to uphold any real authority. The King of Norway had been patiently watching the struggle unfold, supporting certain individuals against others, until time was ripe for his takeover. Between 1262 and 1264, all men of influence in Iceland pleaded their loyalty for the king. This effectively meant the end of the Free State and the onset of that long period in Iceland's history where the country was fundamentally a province within a federal monarchy. It took some time to happen, but one by one the old families surrendered, the Svinfellingar last of all. And the final leader to succumb to the Norwegian crown was our very own Þorvarður Þórarinsson. In a contemporary source, there is the description of Þorvardur's journey to Norway, where he finally gives up all his estates into the hands of the king. The author concludes his account with these words: "The Icelanders have never since gainsaid obedience to the bidding and banning of King Magnus." Þorvarður has for this reason been designated the last chieftain of Iceland. So if Guðmundsson's theory were true, the greatest piece of literature in medieval Iceland was composed by the last man standing against foreign rule in the country. Pretty impressive, right? It should be stressed, however, that it's only a hypothesis, and like so much other Icelandic scholarship from the first half of the 20th century, this idea is inevitably shaped by modern-day nationalism.